So I just, it's a page full there, Kenneth. I probably will leave them to read that, but suffice it to say that our guest here, Kenneth Habate, is someone who has the educational degree and the training background as well as passion, having spoken with him many times in helping our youth, especially in this area of really recognizing, among other things, the role of the family. So he looks at the social context, among other things. This is not new to him, speaking to a large forum, and so he has agreed to grace this evening for the South sector, as well as some other members of our community from the different sectors. So without further ado, I'd like to just invite on stage our guest speaker for tonight, Dr. Kenneth Ross Habate.
Thank you, Sir June, for that very kind introduction. Let me just set this up. Is it on? Not yet. Wala pa. Okay. All right. Okay, good evening, everybody. How are you all tonight? Traffic ba? Okay. So thank you for being here. I know you are all probably very tired from a full day of work. I just came myself from a full day of clinic. I've seen around 15 or somewhere around the range of 15 to 20 patients today. Some adults, a lot of them young individuals, going through various stages of mental health problems, various stages of difficulty, depression, anxiety. It's very difficult work. It can be very draining because a lot of the problems, I can get, it's something that can affect one. Can be very difficult to hear, the struggles that a lot of our young people are facing today. And therefore, it is therefore very heartwarming for me to see all of you here today, all present, because I think it just goes to show the fact that you are here and interested means that you want to be able to understand what is going on in terms of the youth of mental health, the mental health of our young people today. And hopefully, hopefully this will be something that will be useful for you. And I hope and pray that I be given the grace to be able to communicate what I wish to bring forth in a way that will be able to make sense in terms of your own experiences. So again, I'm a psychiatrist, meaning a doctor, a physician who specializes in helping people with mental health problems. I'm an adult psychiatrist, but my subspecialization is child and adolescent psychiatry, meaning my additional training is working not just with, typically when we say pag may mental health problem, pag may mental illness, we think of older people, di ba? But unfortunately, nowadays, parang our youth are challenged. And when we talk about youth, in my role as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, to talk about adolescents 10 to 8, defined now by the WHO, 10 to 19 years old. Children, 2 to 10, 2 to 9, and unfortunately, as you may have been seeing from social media, from the reports in the news, parang our children seem to be more at risk. And the fact na mas matunog kasi siya, it reflects the fact that there are a lot of young people parang struggling today and in need of help. And being a child psychiatrist, being one of only 50 around 50 to 60 child psychiatrists in the country, currently a lot of us are overwhelmed now, no? Parang because of the sheer number of parang people who are crying out, who are suffering, who are having difficulties and are being unable to move forward with their lives in terms of their work as students, in terms of their relationships with their families, with their friends, and with themselves. We have, we certainly need, we can't do it alone as child psychiatrists, so we need to partner. I've been fortunate in my work, in my training and in my work to have been able to work with different groups of people. I've lectured and worked with schools because they know that nowadays the students, they need help. I've also been fortunate to also be able to work in the past couple of years with pediatricians because they also know that in their clinics, it's not just para physical health problems that they're seeing now. A lot of them are going because they're suicidal, they're hurting themselves. So, yeah, we need to be able to all come together to be able to help, no? But you can help with teachers, parang other doctors, but at the heart of it, I'm very grateful for this opportunity because the family is really the fundamental unit from which a young person evolves from and grows within. And therefore, if we're looking at in terms of wellness, prevention, protection, it starts with the family, which is why that is the title of my talk today. And it's really when we talk about the mental health of the youth today, my focus will be on the role of the family and what you can do to support and protect the mental health of your young people. So as I said, being a doctor, usually in terms of illness, ideally dapat hindi, but we'll talk about, but in order to understand what illness is, you have to come to understand what health is about anyway. The World Health Organization in general defines health, mental health, as a state of well-being in which the individual can realize his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his and her community. Sabi nga ng WHO, there is no health without mental health. But speaking about going to the level of the young people, when we talk about child and adolescent mental health, one author defines it very nicely. And these are seen in the domains of, number one, what does it mean in terms of their identity and self-worth? Mental health and well-being in children is demonstrated in sound family and peer relationships. When you are mentally healthy, you have an ability to be productive and to learn. And therefore, at the end of the day, you have the capacity to be able to use the developmental challenges that is faced by any child, that is faced by a young person. No? Kasi the formative years are very important. In terms of developmental challenges, parang the most, when you are below 18, parang in terms of forming who you will be and who you will, how you will contribute to the world, parang when you are older, this is formed in these parang first 18 years. And therefore, parang it requires mental health, which is a capacity to use these developmental challenges and whatever resources are available in order to maximize one's development. I was just talking with Sir June a while ago, and he was talking about, in the old days, the prospect of having to see a psychiatrist parang is so foreign, is so alien. The prospect of thinking about mental health or problems with mental health is something one didn't have to parang think about unless if the situation was really, really bad, no? But unfortunately, researchers nowadays, mental health experts, have begun to realize that it is important when we're talking about the mental health of the population to have a special focus on the mental health of young persons. And there are three reasons for that, according to this to one of the articles that is very seminal in terms of one of the experts on global mental health. The first point is that it is important to talk about mental health in young people because, in reality, most mental disorders begin during youth. Although they are often first detected later in life, no? Because of the stigma, obviously, parang we will. It's very human to try to want to hope that when somebody is having a mental health, parang seems like having a mental health issue, parang hindi pa yan. That's just when they are young. Parang it's growing up. They're a teenager. It's normal to have storms, diba? And it is, you know. But however, the reality that, well, siguro around 10% of individuals will eventually parang suffer from a mental health problem through their lifetime. Parang the reality for a lot of these people is that when we talk about the mental health problems that are so intractable when they're older, problems with depression, problems with suicidal behavior, problems with drug abuse, alcohol abuse, problems with addiction, parang nag-umpisa na yan when they were younger pa lang eh. Oh. And I was an adult psychiatrist in terms of my training, as we all are. And, you know, I mean, your idea of somebody with a mental health problem is somebody who is already, somebody who is parang, kumbaga, parang very difficult to help because the problems are already so severe. The relationships are already broken. The support, parang no matter how the families, for example, try to help this parang older person, parang ang hirap na. And even in terms of my work as a therapist, parang working with adults can be very challenging. Sometimes it's like you're just doing damage control because you're just trying to help, parang clear the symptoms, para magiging tutulungan mo siya parang from his depression, anxiety, and then 2 years after, parang babalik siya sa'yo. Kaya sabi nga sa akin ng one of my mentors when I was training, pag psychiatrist ka, parang yung mga pasyente mo, hindi na mawawala sa'yo yan. Kasi a lot of it, unfortunately, parang mental health problems, and that is I think what underlies why mental health problems are stigmatized. They are chronic na eh. But, yun nga eh, that's if you have that perception that mental health problems are your adult problems. Because that's why when they're already bad because when they are detected, parang malala na sila. They've been going on for a long while. The changes both in terms of the psyche, the psychology of the person, how the person thinks, feels, how the person copes, parang has already been very affected for a long period of time. The relationships, parang, when somebody has parang family problems, parang when we talk about them, parang they're so deeply rooted, no? And it's so hard to fix at that point pag matatanda na. Pero the reality is they started when during earlier in life, no? And the good thing about my work, working with younger individuals, and as my mentor, who is the father of child psychiatry in the Philippines, Dr. Cornelio Banaag, loves to say, and that is common for a psychiatrist to become child and adolescent adult psychiatrist to become child and adolescent psychiatrist. Parang it offers a great opportunity to change the trajectory of a person's life, Because at that stage, as with any health problem, when it's starting pa lang, pag bata pa, marami ka pang magagawa. And that's something that I'm fortunate to see in my practice, because I practice both as an adult psychiatrist, as a child and adolescent psychiatrist. Sometimes, as I said, some of my adult patients, damage control na lang eh. But the child and adolescent psychiatrist, it's very encouraging because, we just have to try to understand some of the factors that are going on, whether it's a family issue, whether it's an issue with a child's self-esteem, or if there is a relationship that you can try to amend, in terms of, or communication issues that you can try to bridge, then it gets so much better. Because the reality of it, uh, studies have been able to demonstrate that this is a chart that demonstrates like when a psychiatric disorder usually first manifests, or what we call the age of onset, no? So you will see there, parang the age of onset is parang in the x-axis, tama ba? The x-axis, yeah. And impulse control disorders usually manifest at a younger age. These are seen as behavioral problems, no? Sometimes kids outgrow parang behavioral issues, being hyperactive, being disruptive, you know. Anxiety disorders usually start to manifest around this time, usually at the start, school refusal, some phobias, you know, and then eventually as parang it progresses, it becomes more generalized to other issues, no? Parang substance use disorders, mood disorders. If you will see in terms of age of onset, if they happen with the age of onset of adolescence, and biologically that makes a lot of sense kasi that's when most of the changes in terms of the brain, parang the hormonal environment being all excited, parang the adolescent storm as it were, parang it unlocks parang these genetic predilections, no? So it's important to be able to see that they begin from there. Although, as I said, because a lot of it has to do with the stigma, people usually try to put it under the rug, no? And unfortunately, sometimes it's already very, very difficult to try to modify or try to intervene. That being said, siguro a caveat lang, parang I'm a psychiatrist and I deal with a lot of mental health parang problems, but siguro medyo defensive, but not everybody whom I see I diagnose with a mental health problem, because I know that it's very challenging to be able to determine parang what constitutes a problem versus a normal parang human experience. Because the reality is, unlike, for example, like other physical health problems, like blindness, obviously that's a problem because you can't see anymore, diba? But how do you determine the difference between somebody just being sad, which is a normal human experience? Everybody of us should not be afraid of being sad, because how do we actually know joy? How do we know real happiness if we don't understand its converse, no? But how does one delineate it from being sad from clinically depressed? How do we know that a person, a young child who is nervous in class, who is afraid of going to school because takot siya sa teacher niya or takot siya of getting bad grades, is actually experiencing already a clinical anxiety that needs intervention? Diba? How do we know if somebody who is just acting hyper or being very angry or irritable is already possibly what we call in the state of mania, or which is if you've heard of the term bipolar, no? Or even in this case, how does a little child who is running around disrupting class, parang just being inattentive or being hyperactive in the way that young individuals are, but already might need intervention because meron na siyang ADHD, no? That's the role of the psychiatrist. That's my role. To be able to determine the thin red line in terms of this spectrum of these experiences, diba? Because yun nga, parang the mental health problems, they are along a spectrum of normal human experience, no? Determining that thin red line parang is the focus of my work. It's one of the most important skills that I have to develop as a psychiatrist, no? But here's a clue in terms of that. Simple lang naman eh. If you look at the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is our Bible in terms of determining parang whether a person has a mental health problem. You know, other doctors, they're kind of luckier or have it easier because, you know, they can look at a laboratory test, an objective test, and say, okay, may problema ka. Or you can look at a thermometer, 37.8 degrees Celsius, fever yan, no? Pero kami, parang we are the tool eh. We have to have a very good determination of what's going on. Otherwise, we run the risk of saying, either not seeing a problem when there is one, or overdiagnosing, no? But if you look again, going back, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is our parang Bible of a psychiatrist, lahat ng mental health disorders has this very important phrase parang below, which you say, when somebody is undergoing through this, mental health problems usually are defined by markedly impaired social and occupational functioning. Diba? Ganun lang. But that can be difficult to determine. No? All right. Ideally, parang we would be here talking about health, talking about wellness. Pero siguro nga, the need for a psychiatrist to come in, parang with my own unique perspective, is the reality that a lot of the days, these days, unfortunately, we are dealing with a lot of what seems to be more severe and more salient problems in terms of people actually hurting themselves. No? Nowadays, the reality is young people do have a high rate of self-harm, and suicide is a leading cause of death in young people. These are things if you have children in your schools, parang it's high, and especially in one of the big schools, you do know that people have jumped from the main buildings, people have committed suicide, parang in campus. So what we're observing here today, when I was a high school student, I did have a batchmate who committed suicide, but that's usually something that's not talked about. It's something that we don't really hear about. But now, parang nowadays, it's as if like every month, parang nagkakaroon na ng issue eh. And unfortunately, in the big schools, I also, aside from my practice in the medical city, I also work as a university psychiatrist in the University of Santo Tomas. And I think the reason why they needed to hire me is that to augment, because now, they're realizing that a lot of young people, a lot of their students, parang do need specialized help. And that's something that the guidance counselors are seeing. But it's not just about my personal experience or what we see in the news. The reality is, child and adolescent, even, I think this is an old study. So even in the 90s, like different countries have tried to see how prevalent mental health problems were. And from Brazil, Ethiopia, India, Japan, parang it's usually in the range of around 10%. That's a lot, 1 in 10, diba? Parang, it's in the range of between 10 to 20% of individuals will have parang mental health problems. And if you're talking about generationally speaking, I'll have Philippine data later, but this is U.S. data from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Like if you see, the numbers are spiking. This the years are too small. Sila yung nasa baba. But if you'll notice from I think 2011, this is a chart demonstrating the prevalence of major depression or a major depressive episode with severe impairment among 12 to 17 years old. 12 to 17-year-old individuals. The lower part is boys, and then the middle part is parang girls and boys, and then girls, no? Parang if you'll notice, in 2011, nag-spike na talaga siya, no? So it's something that has been going on, and we'll try to examine later why, parang what is happening with teens these days, that they are actually what we can call in a stage of a mental health crisis, no? Or a mental health epidemic. In the Philippines, we can always say, oh, these are Western parang data, it doesn't happen here, no? Sana nga lang hindi eh. But unfortunately, like if you, as early as 2003, the United Nations and the Centers for Disease Control did did a nationally representative study in terms of high school students in the Philippines, meaning nationally representative, like all regions from Apari to Holo, parang were represented, no? And simple lang yung questions because it's a global student Global Student Health Survey. They asked a lot of questions about their dietary habits, their study habits, etc. But they did have a section on parang their mental health and well-being or the problems with it. Parang the numbers are pretty staggering for me, no? 42% reported feeling sad or hopeless for 2 weeks or more in the past 2 years. Almost half. No? 1/5 had seriously considered committing suicide in the past year. And I think probably among those, nearly all of those had probably made a plan how they would commit suicide. I'm presuming it's not a specific plan, but usually probably thinking of the means by how which they would do it. No? And it's not just about depression. Like around 15% said that most of the time they felt always felt so worried about something that they could not sleep at night in the past 12 months. Not all of those are parang people with diagnosed mental health problems. As we know, adolescence is a stormy time emotionally. But the fact that there are a lot means that there are a lot of cases, real cases that need intervention underneath. And if we are not identifying them early enough, we lose them, unfortunately. Okay. And finally, the important thing, it's not just mental health is not an issue in isolation. No? In fact, I would, one of my parang catchphrases is that I talk about how mental health is fundamental. No? It's not separate from other domains of development. And you see that a strong relation exists actually between poor mental health and other parang problems, health and developmental concerns for young people, notably with educational achievements, substance use and abuse, violence, reproductive and sexual health. So if you have poor mental health, you probably have problems in these other areas as well. So you can see, for example, this is the Young Adult Fertility and Sexuality Survey. This is more recent. It is in 2013, looking about the various facets of Filipino youth, 15 to 27 years old. No? So, they had, again, diet, parang exercise, but in terms of what we call, they had sexual risk behaviors, non-sexual risk behaviors, parang smoking, drinking, parang there's a correlation, including parang between those problems as well as suicide, no? So among 15 to 27 years old, 15 to 19 year olds, it's just one question, but 7.3% among them, this nationally representative sample. So if you count around, we are 100 million, siguro 40 million of those are youth, no? So 77% of 40 million have actually ever thought of committing suicide. 5% of 40 million tried to commit suicide or are harming themselves. Nowadays, when I ask a student, nagka-cut ka ba? Parang dati isipin mo lang nagka-cut. When you say you would think, are they cutting class, diba? But actually nowadays I have to clarify because I have to clarify whether they are cutting class or cutting themselves. Because a lot of them are doing that, unfortunately. So, yeah. But mental health problems, how do we understand them? No? Because it is happening. No? We have to remember that mental is not emotional lang. No? It's not all about feelings. That's one of the myths about mental health. As a psychiatrist, I feel very lucky because I exercise parang a lot of my brain in terms of understanding the different facets of whoever I am seeing in the clinic. No? Meaning, when somebody has a mental health problem, I know that there are no singular causes to it. It's usually a confluence of different factors. No? Kasi, unfortunately, I have some parents, like kanina lang, parang 20-year-old, parang a very smart but very anxious individual, worried about his or her academic performance. Hindi naman siya bumabagsak, but but because mukhang he has ADHD, has a lot of attention problems from a young age. Parang studying at Xavier, knew that he couldn't had to work harder and couldn't keep up. So he got teased also because of these things. So he grew up with resultantly very poor self-esteem. So there are a lot of factors that are going on there. But the parents, they're very well-meaning, but they keep trying to ask, so Doc, what's the problem? Parang was he bullied? Is it a sexuality issue? Trying to look for that one parang individual factor. Kaso hindi ganun eh. Parang mental health, parang it's complicated, no? And there's no singular answer because it's usually a confluence of biological factors, psychological factors, and social factors, no? So, example, diba? Like biological, we talk about physical health, genetic vulnerabilities, and then you interact. Kasi diba, yun yung, I think, when I was parang training in psychology, there's this whole big debate you may have heard of nature versus nurture. Parang, is it because when a person is like, yung personality niya is because parang the genes, was it parang determined by that, or was it because of the upbringing, for example? As if parang it's an either or thing, no? Both. Kasi yun nga, biological, yun nga, yung nature part of it, but it interacts with the social environment, no? The peers, the school, and you, the parents, and their families. No? And of course, parang when somebody has a mental health problem, that also comes into play. Parang that interacts into forming the personality of that person, the one person's self-esteem, or the lack of it, coping skills, or the lack of it, social skills. So the confluence of that, parang it's very important in trying to understand parang what it means when a person has a mental health problem. No? It's not just one factor. Example, one of the most difficult cases that I'm handling now, I just saw her this morning, so her story is very fresh in my mind. She's a very intelligent, 17-year-old female. Was referred to me by the guidance counselor a couple of months back. And parang back then, I had to, the initial, because she was so suicidal, I had to admit her parang temporarily in the medical city psychiatric unit, no? And usually naman admissions naman nowadays, you have to realize they're just temporary things. It's not a chronic kind of thing anymore. We just have to protect them for a while in the hospital, and then when they're a bit better, we discharge them. And most of the work that I do is outpatient treatment. I think though that when we have to admit somebody, it's very, very bad already. Meaning, we have no other choice but to parang place them in a very controlled setting. I mean, physically controlled, because that's the only way that you can. That's the safest way that you can ensure that their parang well-being is intact. Kasi otherwise, if they're very suicidal, whether parang kids will find a way, diba? But so she was very suicidal, but it was a confluence of a lot of factors. In the first place, biologically, she had a genetic predisposition for mental illness. Her father, I think, by how he is described, parang by the other members of the family, also has bipolar depression. The patient is bipolar also, so parang namana siya. So meaning the moods parang swing very erratically. All of our moods naman, we're not naman all just robots who are just like parang happy all the time or sad all the time. But unfortunately, the swings are too wild, no? And whether they are too sad or too manic, too excitable, too hyper, it's both very dysfunctional, no? So the genetic predisposition is there. Unfortunately, psychologically, because of her experiences in school, she's bullied. Nowadays, parang technology can be kind of scary. Parang you have these social media accounts, and apparently, I'm a millennial. So I grew up both with and without. I grew up without technology, but I grew up in an age where parang I was more familiar with it. But nowadays, parang our young people today, parang they know no other world but the internet and social media. And it's gone to the point where they have accounts they can actually para post, and then they sign up for these accounts where people can message them anonymously, or people parang post on their wall anonymously. And parang that was the means by which she was being bullied by her parang peers, no? And as a result, of course, you have very bad parang a view of yourself, your self-esteem. She has weight issues, although she's very pretty, but and unfortunately, the other challenge parang is that her mother are parang methamphetamine abusers. So a lot of those factors are parang coming in together. And at the end of the day, all of the sessions, we see each other like once a week or twice every 2 weeks. Parang sabi niya, Dr. Havate, I want to die. Dr. Havate, parang, there's no point. I'm trying everything na, but I want to die. I don't anymore. I've tried everything. And sabi niya, and then she thinks of the weirdest things to do. Like she drinks parang rubbing alcohol, or she'll say that she gets water from the imbornal and she mixes it with her Gatorade in the hope that she'll get some sort of parang gastrointestinal infection, that kind of thing. So, but I think it has to show that she's really suffering from all of these factors. Diba? So we have to realize when somebody is undergoing through a problem, we have to see these influences, and they're, broadly speaking, we can divide them into risk and protective factors. When we say risk factors, to talk about that more now, they refer to the factors that increase the probability of the occurrence of mental health problems or disorders. And probably I can find a way to send some of these articles to you. Parang this might be helpful, and then we'll talk about this later. Protective factors moderate, meanwhile, the effects of the risk and of the risk exposure. So again, it's still biopsycho and social, And we're talking about here, since you are parang parents, you have to know that you can't do anything about genetics. That can happen. Unfortunately, also, families can cause mental health problems. They can exacerbate mental health problems. How do this occur? Unfortunately, through inconsistent caregiving, if there is family conflict, parang we call this adverse life events, poor family discipline, poor family management, or death in the family can cause that. School can also parang contribute to that. Academic failure, the failure of schools to provide an appropriately mentally healthy environment, bullying, and it's also important that the greater community or the shifts at large in society also contribute to this. So transitions, community disorganization, exposure to violence, transitions, generational transitions included. So I posted a while ago that nowadays teenagers are more at risk. That's the reality. More of them are depressed, more of them are anxious, more of them have mental health problems. Bakit kaya, Sige, let's try to understand what's going on. Who among you here are born between okay lang bang magtanong ng age? Okay lang Okay, we're all friends here. 1946 to 1960. Ayan po. Kayo po ang baby boomer generation. You know that, diba? Here's to the baby boomers, Okay. And then 1961 to 1980. Ayan. Nasa gilid. Ayan. Generation X. Okay? Ayan. Sabi ng Generation X is because they're looking for their mark. They're looking for X marks the spot. Generation X actually forms the bulk of the parents of the teenagers today, baby boomers medyo nagiging grandparents na po kayo, I think, Okay. And next to that is from I don't know, I think there are some parents who are now beginning to be from this cohort, 1981 to 1995, including myself. Ayan, Generation Y or the millennials, diba? Diba? Ayan. Alright. Millennials. Sige na, okay, sige na po. Ayan. And unfortunately nowadays, millennials, kasi uso yan, di ba? Kala natin I'm a millennial. I'm an old millennial, but I'm a millennial. Unfortunately, hindi na tayo uso actually. Pasay na tayo. Because nowadays, it's now no longer the age of the millennials, but Generation Z. Okay? These are the individuals who are born after 1995. Okay? These are the people who are teenagers today. These are our young people. Okay? What characterizes Generation Z? Actually, Generation Z is not a very nice name. I have another name for them later, no? But if you'll notice, what characterizes Generation Z? Yeah, that's what they do all the time. They are on their smartphones and they are on social media. No? It was in 2012? Or wait, I'm confused. No, 2007 in which the iPhone was introduced. No? And therefore paved the way for the revolution of a smartphone. Okay. I'm not gonna ask everybody to raise, actually, sino ba, I'm going to ask the reverse question. Sino pa ba, who here are not on a smartphone? Wala, di ba? Lahat kayo naka-smartphone, di ba? And that shows that, it has completely dominated our lives, no? Even us, no? But remember, parang it's interesting even for me, di ba? It's for us, it's a new thing. Because it's a new technology. We had to learn it, no? Gen Zs, the term is digital natives. They didn't know any other time, diba? So parang it's one of the biggest in terms of we're talking about generational shifts or things that have affected our young people. It's the dominance of the smartphone. No? A lot of, not just whether it's an iPhone or a Samsung, whatever. No? They are the first generation for whom internet access has constantly been available, and not just on screens. It's right there in their hands all the time. No? And we gave them that. Diba? Gen Xers. You put it in their hands. Diba? Unfortunately, what are the implications of that? So in terms of trying to understand, parang these are not just parang haka-haka lang, no? I draw upon the work of this very, very interesting work. I've been reading her book, but this is, if you want to be able to research parang shorter version of this is available online pa din. It's a very interesting article about how smartphones destroyed a generation. No? It's in the magazine called The Atlantic. So that's an article and coming from a book by Jean Twenge. She is a social psychologist, and her particular area of expertise is generations. No? The differences between Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. She's written a book about millennials, and this is her book about Generation Z. The title is iGen, appropriately, di ba? Because iPhone. And the title is Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood. Now, what does that mean? Well, technology is not the only, as she writes, technology is not the only change shaping this generation. The I in iGen represents the individualism its members take for granted, a broad trend that grounds their bedrock sense of equality as well as their rejection of traditional social rules. It also captures the income inequality that is creating a deep insecurity among iGeners. Actually, millennials, yung mga millennials, parang we are caricatured for being overconfident about the future, diba? That's why we really don't say we spend everything. No? But parang iGeners are more insecure because they grow up in more parang difficult parang times. After 9/11, for example. To become a have rather than have not. Due to these influences and many others, iGen is distinct from every previous generation in how its members spend their time, how they behave, and their attitudes towards religion, sexuality, and politics. They socialize in completely new ways, a lot of it virtual, reject once sacred and social taboos, and want different things from their lives and their careers. They are obsessed with safety and fearful of their economic futures, and they have no patience for inequality based on gender, race, or sexual orientation. They are at the forefront of the worst mental health crisis in decades, with rates of teen depressions and suicides skyrocketing, as I've mentioned, since 2011. Contrary to the prevalent ideas that children are growing up faster than previous generations did, iGeners are actually growing up more slowly. 18-year-olds now act like 15-year-olds, and 13-year-olds act like 10-year-olds. Teens are more physical, and that's true. Parang, when I talk about my patients nowadays, parang the issues of my parang young adults are parang very teenage issues. And sometimes the early teenagers, they're like little kids. But anyway, teens are physically safer than ever. Diba? Because they're not going out. They're not hanging outside. They're in their rooms. Diba? They're on their phones. But they're more mentally vulnerable. Diba? So, it's not just something that, haka-haka lang in the air. So, although unfortunately, the ideal is that we have like local data to support this. This is US data. But parang siguro what we do see, parang in my work as a local psychiatrist, is that usually parang we trend to, because of the strong influence of American culture, parang a lot of middle class Filipino culture tends to be very influenced by the United States, no? So, but her studies, I think, are drawn from again parang samples of 11 million parang teenagers that she asked at a specific point in time. So she's asked baby boomers. There are studies kasi that have tracked how they ask the same questions to baby boomers when they're teenagers, Gen Xers when they're teenagers, and then Gen Zers when they're teenagers. So these are the differences that she's parang noticed, no? So the smartphone generation. So the constant presence of the internet, particularly social media, is changing the behavior of today and attitudes of today's teens. Nowadays, parang when Gen Xers and millennials were younger, I remember our push was to get out of the house, to get our freedom, to become independent. Nowadays, strangely enough, there's a trend that people are quite comfortable staying at home, no? And they're no longer hanging out with their friends, at least in person. This has been a change since 2007, which was coincidentally when the iPhone was released. So that's the downward trend over there. It might be more relevant to the States. They're in no rush to drive. So the young teenagers who have 12th graders, teenagers who have been getting their driver's licenses have also been decreasing since 2007. And they've said, parang in the interviews they say, I don't need to because it's much more convenient if my mom or dad will take me. Diba? I don't need to learn how to drive, and I don't need to have that responsibility. They're actually dating less. They're hanging out less with their friends. In one sense, they are actually having less premarital sex. They're actually engaging in less alcohol use because they're partying less. Because as I said, where are they? They're at home. They're in their beds. They're hanging out with their friends through their phones. But does that mean that they are parang more connected? Not really. They're actually more lonely. Or do they, even if they spend time at home, does that mean that they spend more quality time with you? Not really. Because one of the ironies of iGen life is despite spending far more time under the same roof as their parents, today's teens can hardly be said to be closer to their mothers and fathers than their predecessors were. So, di ba? Parang, and you've seen that. I have one of my tools in evaluating a young person is like I ask them to draw what we call kinetic family drawing. I ask them to draw their family doing something. I'm kind of not surprised that a lot of the time, parang the young person on hand will draw parang a family, parang, they're, well, at a meal, but they're always parang doing something on, like a lot of the members will be on their phones. And that's the reality, di ba? At home, parang some of your children, it may have been a challenge for them to talk with you because they're constantly texting. Or baka kayo din, di ba? They may not be able to communicate with you because you are yourself parang drawn to whatever new alert your Instagram feed has had for you, no? So, as a result also, they're less likely to get enough sleep, diba? We know, the studies have been able to demonstrate that phones do have blue light. They call this a wavelength of light that has been shown to to interfere with the hormone called melatonin, which is responsible for how well you sleep. Diba you have melatonin supplements? You don't have to take that. It's a naturally occurring thing. Diba? But unfortunately, the blue light does disrupt that. And this is seen in how a lot of 8th, 10th, and 12th graders get less than 7 hours of sleep on most nights. And as I said, the promise of social media is that you're more connected than ever before. You can still be able to chat with your friend your friends from the United States. And tayo, that's been a boon for us, diba? Because Filipinos, diba, a lot of our contemporaries, they work abroad, so it's a means for us to communicate with them. But unfortunately, parang has that made our teenagers happier, more connected? Ironically, hindi. Diba? They help teens. They stay in close touch with their friends via text and online. They exchange parang funny pictures, memes. And they constantly update everybody on what they're doing. But that doesn't assuage their loneliness. In fact, they're lonelier than they were just 5 years ago. 31% more 8th and 10th graders felt lonely in 2015 than 2011, along with 22% more 12th graders. So this is a big change. Kasi dati, the generations would just like be parang peaks and valleys. Now, her research has shown that parang the changes are parang very abrupt nowadays. I mean, but how do you see that? We have seen that more screen time actually does, it's common sense. It results in less in-person social interaction, and it leads to more loneliness, no? So with teens spending less time on activities that assuage loneliness and more time on those that don't, it's not surprising that loneliness has increased. And that's what we say, parang alongside this, no, I know that a lot of teenager, one of the main issues for teens is being connected talaga. You define your identity through your parang interpersonal connections. A lot of it with your peers. Diba? Now, that is normal for every teenager, whether you're a baby boomer, millennial, Gen Xer, Gen Y. And as a result of that, of course, it is not surprising that loneliness results in more depressive symptoms. No? So again, since 2007 and upwards, tumataas in generational, it's too small to read, that who report that they can't do anything right, who agree with the statement that my life is not useful, or who say that they do not enjoy life.